statement, do they provide evidence? You know, when you have politicians saying that we have to do something because there's going to be this massive attempt to implement Sharia and take over the country, you want to say, great, how come in the article did they mention any movements? In Tennessee now they're saying this, that in fact this community, which has lived there integrated, actually there's a secret unit that wants to implement Sharia. Do they identify the people? Do they have statements? Has somebody recorded what they said? Has anybody, tested it out? It's one of those things where we're getting to be a society where we listen to the news that corroborates our worldview, whether we're super liberal, super conservative, or whatever. That's our station. My wife and I have some really good friends. The guy's a retired guy who's president of 2 companies, okay? But when it comes to his politics, he listens to a station in one of the states that I live in. I live in a couple of states. I have to keep moving. But it's a station that all day plays a certain view of immigrants and of Muslims, okay? And so when he talks, that's his vision. And it's so inundated that when one goes to talk about other perspectives, and I understand it in a way, he can't believe it. But what is he going to read and listen to? He's going to read and listen to, and I'm on all these chains too. These chains that come from, because my brother's a super conservative Catholic, and because a lot of our friends are super conservative, sort of anti-Muslim, right-wing Christians, I get these chain letters. Not just because they come to me, they get sent to my brother, or my wife does a lot of work in one of our parishes, so the people she works with send her these rabid anti-Arab and anti-Muslim. And so, what do? You get on and you try to find data to send, but with some people it works and with others it doesn't, because they keep writing back with the next chain and saying, well, that was interesting, but now I got this other set. And it's a video out of Sweden. It's unbelievable. In perfect English, where they say that 3 things you ought to know about Muslims are. The Quran says you should do X. No passage in the Quran that says that, But, how do you begin to address it? So that's a problem that Muslims in the West face. And it's also a problem for us internationally. Because with international globalization, when you see Part 51, when you see people yelling, mosques are monuments to terrorism, okay? Just mosques across the country. That both feeds a sense overseas that, well, these people must be anti. Just as when we watched the Iranian Revolution and we yelled death to America, they were yelling death to America, we figured that's the way all Iranians feel and that's probably the way all Muslims feel. We're not stupid. They're yelling that, I mean, that's part of what we're dealing with. And it allows the extremists to say, look at those schmuck mainstream majority Muslims in America. They thought they were integrated, educationally, etc. But what are they discovering? Even though they're integrated, they're suddenly waking up and realizing there's a sizable number of Americans, and many of them pretty well educated, who actually look at them and think they're off the wall. Even if they're not people wearing traditional dress, but wearing the best of modern dress, even if they're people who graduated from the Kennedy School, well, that could make them even more dangerous. So it's a kind of, and also think about the logic. And this is a kind of, and this plays into Bin Laden, but think also about the logic that does occur. After all the demonizing of Muslims that occurred across the country and continues, okay, all right, what's the next question that people raise? Is this going to promote extremism at home? Well, it just might, but it's almost like saying, it's like a catch-22. If you're a mainstream Muslim, it's okay. So now you get painted as extremists, and people do things that in fact can alienate, marginalize, and maybe drive some young people into saying, well, what the hell is going on here, And then we get victimized because now they're still going to think that I, a mainstream Muslim, is a potential radical. So it's a catch-22. Okay. But what do Muslims really think globally about us? Remember, after 9/11, people said, "Why do they hate us?" Let me set out 2 scenarios for you. Terrorist hates, okay, whether they're Muslim or not. Okay? Terrorists are people that hate in order to do what they do. They hate. I'm using the word hate in the narrow sense. Okay. Vast majority of people around the world, not only in the Muslim world but in Europe, etc., have a real problem with our American foreign policy. And therefore, we would regard them in their political statements at times as anti-American if they disagree with our policy, if they're critical of our policy. We would say they're anti-American. Doesn't mean they necessarily hate us. Polling done by both Pew and Gallup. I'm associated with the Gallup organization, and so I'm aware of what's called Gallup World Poll, the largest, most systematic poll ever done in the Muslim world. Originally done 35 countries, and now I think we're up to about 45, but originally done 35 countries from North Africa to Southeast Asia, representing the voices of 1 billion Muslims. And it's a poll, you know, some of us say, well, what about that poll? How was it done? Because some polling is, I call you up on the phone, I call a random sample. No, this is a poll that took a couple of years, and it's a poll where literally Gallup sends people out into the field, i.e. it trains local people to interview people of every age bracket, sex, economic area, not only in urban areas, but in village areas and in rural areas all over the world. Okay? And actually, it was part of a well-being poll. So people aren't answering this as if they think it's just about religion. A well-being poll means where you're polling to see how do you feel about your life, your country. Do you feel you have mobility? Do you feel, you know, economic mobility? Do you feel you have a good education ability? Are you happy? Do you feel that your family has an opportunity to prosper? And then you work in other attitudes and values in their whole set of questions. What we discover is that, in fact, let me preface it by saying, how many of you have heard, consistently hear, and or ask yourself the question, why don't more Muslims speak out against terrorism? Why didn't they deny 9/11? That's, okay? Okay. Well, you're getting better, because most audiences, almost everybody raised their hand. In fact, the New York Times continues to have pieces, just recently for the second time, by Tom Friedman, who was a reporter in the Middle East for a long time, saying that. Okay? The reality of it is, if you look at the New York Times within 1 week after 9/11, and it was a one-pager from the Beckett Fund. Beckett Fund is not a Muslim fund. A one-pager with major Muslim leaders denouncing the attacks of 9/11. Okay? It's not that there weren't some who supported it. Okay? And in fact, what you've got to ask yourself is, why is it that although that denunciation took place after 9/11 by many major religious leaders, and terrorism is denounced consistently to this time, including terrorist attacks here and in Europe, why don't you know about it? If you don't know about it, it's because what? You don't see it in your newspaper, right? Or in your news. Well, why are you blaming the victim? Blame the media. It's not newsworthy. 2 more quick examples. What time's the Sunday service start? I think we may go right into it. So, how many of you have ever heard of the Amman, as in Amman, Jordan message? Okay, we got 1. All right. How many? 2. How many of you have heard? You're cheating. How many of you have heard about a common word? 1, 2, 3. Not bad. Okay, we're getting religiously literate here. All right. Let me tell you this. The Amman message was done 5, 6, 7 years ago. I forget. The king of Jordan asked religious leaders to put together a set of questions defining what, as it were, mainstream Islam is, but also to address the question of what is radicalism, extremism, who has a right to give a fatwa. It was all aimed at this question of bin Laden either giving fatwas or getting them and trying to delegitimate extremism. Then he got religious leaders to discuss it, and got mainstream religious leaders, because with globalization and communications you can do this for the first time in history, only because we have these communications, could you actually get global Muslim leaders to draw up a statement in order to delegitimate extremism, okay? Where were the media reports? Isn't this what the media would be looking for? I mean, we have a world in which we've divided Muslims and asked the question, or divide them into what? Good Muslims and bad Muslims. Would you be offended if I came in and said, are you the good evangelicals or the bad evangelicals? You know, the good Jews or the non-Jews? I mean, I had somebody in Congress call me up and say, a group of congressmen wanted to meet with a group of Muslims. Could I help them draw up a list of good Muslims? Good Muslim religious leaders. I go, could you imagine me saying good pastors? Good rabbis? If I had said, yeah, let me give you my list of good and bad rabbis. The president of my university would be hearing about that. Okay. Nobody knows about that. Then you have a common word. Now, what's interesting about a common word is a common word, again, done out of Jordan. I'm associated with common word just for transparency. Common word was bringing together, getting, okay, major Muslim religious leaders and others, to write a major text. You want to look at the website for Common Word, because it's done from a theological point of view. It's very interesting. And if you look at their website, they will publish statements by Christians, both conservative and more liberal evangelicals and Catholics, who either agree or disagree. So, I mean, they put all this on. But what this statement Muslims do, and they cite the Quran and the Bible consistently, is they basically say, look, we have our differences. We have a similarity, we have our differences. We have our differences religiously, politically, etc. But we live in a globalized world where we share many concerns and interests, and we need to find a basis to work together. And we have that basis in our scriptures. Love of God and love of neighbor. Again, how much coverage did it get? I did the launch with Syed Hussein Nasser at the National Press Club. We had a full room, but it was a small full room. In other words, I've done National Press Club and gone to them where the rooms are usually big. This was small. You know, it's like when I run things in my university. You know, if I have Bob Roberts, I have a room with 6 chairs, because I don't want him to be upset that only 8 people come. But if I have myself, then I have a huge hall. No. But you know what I mean? I mean, we got the small room. And what made it even more deceptive was the majority of people in the room were from Muslim newspapers. That isn't who we need to have broadcasting this, you know, or your major newspapers gave it no coverage. Now, why was this interesting? This statement was sent out to heads of the Lutheran Church, the Presbyterian Church, major evangelical leaders, the Pope, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Orthodox patriarchs, okay, and they got statements back from them. Where's the report on it? Even more interesting is a follow-up. Many of you know that, and it's been fairly well corroborated by a number of religious leaders, that we found the place where Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist, and it's actually in Jordan. That site has now been developed. The Jordanian government has given a parcel of land to many of the major Christian churches so that they can build a church or a cathedral, whatever their money flow and their institutional ego is like, whether they want small or big, etc. But they can build there. This is a unique site. This is a unique place. Okay? But also this unique thing where you've got the government giving this parcel, and where you've got the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Pope, major evangelical leaders, each of them accepting and building something there. You don't hear about that. Okay. All right. What do majorities of Muslims say when they're asked about the West? Okay, do they hate us? What we discover is that in contrast to a majority of Americans, 57%, who when asked in 2005 and 6, and the percentage is now maybe 54%, are asked, what do you admire about Islam? Okay? More than half of Americans say nothing or I don't know. Significant percentage of Americans doubt the loyalty of Muslims, wouldn't want them as a neighbor, and admit a certain amount of prejudice, and usually admit that their prejudice is twice that towards any other faith. Okay? Again, not towards extremists, but Muslims. Muslims, when asked, majorities of Muslims say they admire our freedoms, our democracy, our work ethic, our economic and scientific advancement. Okay? They admire. What do they resent? They don't talk about resenting our culture or civilization. We may have our religious differences, but we have a lot in common. But it's not seen as cultural. What do they resent? This is an open-ended question, so it's not even where you check. Open-ended question. They resent the denigration of Islam and Muslims. The sense that Muslim life is cheaper than Western life, or non-Muslim life. Okay? They resent that. And they are very concerned, significant numbers of Muslims, with, and fearful, just as we have our fears, fearful of extremism and terrorism, because they're the primary victims, and of Western intervention, invasion, or occupation. Okay? What do they say to improve relations should be done? Number one, the exact thing that we believe about ourselves. More help technologically, educationally, and economically. Number two, respect Islam and Muslims. Respect Islam and Muslims. That's why when you see how an incident like the Danish cartoons, or what went on at Park 51 in particular Park 51, and the aftermath, why that's a matter of concern. Not just of outrage by, you know, a minority who get carried away, but a matter of concern, you know. And by the way, in terms of getting emotive and emotional, look, you know, you all have a lost background, so maybe many of you